Well, good evening. It is 7:01, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Rod Schaub. I work at the Frontier Extension District office over at Linden, and we're glad to have you join us this evening for our heifer selection and management Zoom meeting. This is the third of our 6-meeting series. It's called the Ag Virtual Series. You know, we really prefer to do these things face to face, but with the COVID-19 and all that that's going on, this is going to be the best method that we have for the time being. Before we get started this evening, I would like to introduce some of my coworkers. Darren Hibden, he's on tonight. He works out of the Ottawa office. Ryan Schaub, he works out of the Garnett office. And then, of course, we have Madison Maurer. Madison's our social media and communications person, and she's the one that's really got the Zoom put up and got this on Facebook Live and all those kind of things. So we'll proceed here in just a few minutes. What I do want to encourage you, if you have questions, we're a small group this evening, okay? So please feel free to just unmute yourself. If you have questions, unmute yourself, ask us questions. We'll try to get those answered as we're going through the program this evening. So with that, our speaker this evening is Jamie Lynn Farney. Jamie Lynn is our beef system specialist. She's housed out of the experiment station down at Parsons, and we're glad to have her with us this evening. It looks like at the time being, she is muted, and I think she will be joining us shortly. Here she comes. So Jamie Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can tell us what we need to know about replacement heifer selection and management. Just remember, guys, this is the decisions you make today will affect you for years to come if you're keeping heifers. Jamie Lynn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rod, for that introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. When I was tasked with this topic, I was so excited, and now I'm like, oh man, I've got way more information than you're probably going to want to sit and listen to. So I do kind of have this split into two bigger topics that we can kind of talk through the first part, ask questions, maybe stand up for a bit, and then finish on into the nutrition. So when I was talking about replacement heifer selection and management, just like Rod had said, this is something that is going to make lifetime effects on your operation. It takes at least 5 calves to pay off the cost of developing a replacement heifer. So you want to make sure that you are very successful in that process. So in regards to some of the things I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to first talk about decisions of which heifers to keep, talk about some vaccinations, talk through the pre-breeding exam, and then talk about nutrition or how to develop those heifers to the breeding point. Now, the very first decision you have to make is really, what is your operations goals? And that's something that we always need to have at the forefront. You need to not necessarily build your entire professional business decision tree, but you do need to say, okay, my goal is I sell all of my calves at weaning. So then if that's your goal, you have to determine how you're going to go about that. So that means you have to purchase replacement heifers. So you need a good source for your replacement heifers. And you, in regards to your mating decisions, need to focus on increasing weaning weight, EPD, etc. Or you need to be like, man, my cows are too big. I need to get them smaller. Those are some things that you need to outline, and that'll help you with your replacement heifer decisions. The other, one of your first decisions is, are you going to keep replacements within your own operation? And the benefits of that is, the ancestry, the health, the performance of that animal. Or do you want to buy your replacement heifers? And there is actually quite a lot of good sources of bred replacement heifers. It's a way to be able to infuse new genetics into your operation, and it has a quicker productive life. And by that, I mean, you can go out and buy a bred replacement heifer instead of spending 2 years. You only feed her for about a couple of months before she calves instead of feeding her for 2 years before she has her calf. Now, there are ups and downs with both decisions, as you probably know. And I'm sorry, meant to grab this. On agmanager.info, there is a very good decision tool to help you with your budgeting to determine, is it cheaper to retain and develop your own replacement heifers or to purchase replacement heifers. So I'd strongly recommend, if you're looking at either of those two options, to go to agmanager.info. Now, when I'm talking, and I'm going to talk mostly about retaining your own replacements or developing your own replacements within your herd. And so for me, one of the first decisions that I want to make is based off of that heifer's birth date. There's been several retrospective studies that have evaluated lifetime productivity based on the way heifers have been developed, but even more specifically, when they calved in their first calving season and when they were born in their respective calving season. So just to give you a little bit of that information, a study summarized out of South Dakota and U.S. Meat Animal Research Center, that's what U.S. Mark is, out of Nebraska, is they had a large number of heifers that they followed for many, many years and looked at their retention or longevity based off of when that heifer calved in her first calving season. So this is the Nebraska data at US Mark. In the blue line, it was whether that heifer had calved in the first 21 days of the calving season. The red is the second 21 days, and the green is the third 21 days. We have calving season along the x-axis and the percentage of heifers remaining in the herd. So off of this data set, that first calving season, 100% of them calved. So they were just looking at whether they calved first, second, or third 21 days. You could see all immediately by that second year that heifer calved, if she had calved in the first 21 days, we had a greater percentage of those that remained in the herd versus calving in those later times. And that just difference became more pronounced with greater number of calves or greater number of calving events. Saw the exact same thing in the South Dakota data. Even after that second calf, they started seeing a very large differentiation in the retention of those heifers within the cow herd. So what did that equate to numerically? Well, off of the US Mark data, they found that the average longevity, if they calved in the first 21 days, was about 8.2 calves versus in the second 21 days, 7.6, and in the third 21-day period, 7.2 years. So you essentially got a whole nother year, a whole nother calf out of those heifers who calved in their first 21-day period. And on the South Dakota heifers, a little rougher environment there. But if they were in the first 21 days, they lasted for 5.1 years versus only 3.9. So that's a very important first criteria. You really want to keep those heifers born in the first 21 days. Now, I guess I should step back. I was remiss in not saying this. There has been a lot of research that shows that those that calve in the first 21 are born in the first 21 days are more likely to be mature and reach puberty and to be bred in that first 21 days. So there is a positive correlation between that. Now, the other importance of wanting your heifer to calve in that first 21 days, the first time she calves, is that over their lifetime, they have found that if they calve in the first 21 days, all the way up to their 6th calf, the weaning weights out of those dams that calved in the first 21 days as a heifer were significantly more than any other time frame. So not only you get them in your herd longer, you get an extra calf, and those calves wean more. So making sure you select those older females is a really good management practice to use in your program. Now, if you're a commercial producer, you maybe don't keep every individual heifer's exact birth date. So if you don't necessarily want to keep that, I recommend using some kind of visual ID to help you identify which heifers are born in the first 21 days of the calving season. You could have one color of tag for all the calves born in that first 21 days, and then a different color tag for afterwards. Or you could tag in the left ear versus the right ear for those different ones. Or if you're handwriting tag numbers, just put dots indicating, the first dot means they were born in the first 21 days, 2 dots means in the second. Just some tools like that as you are running those heifers through the chute, you could be like, oh, she was born in the second 21 days. I'm going to go ahead and send her down the road. Now, we talked about the age part. Now, genetically, what do you want to select? I'd already mentioned this once before, and I don't know if I can mention this enough. It's going to be very operationally specific. If you sell all your animals at weaning versus keeping your replacements, if you're needing to make your cows smaller, all of those go into your genetic selection criteria. And, if you've been around a geneticist talking about heifer selection, they can take up hours of your education just on that. So I'm just going to gloss over it a little bit, just hit on a few of the generalities. EPDs are a wonderful tool to help with your selection process. And even if you are a commercial operation, but you still use registered bull on your cows, there is a lot of great information you can get from that bull to help you. Now, one of the questions that I get a lot of is, can I keep a heifer out of a heifer? My answer to that is maybe, or it depends. So if you utilize the maternal calving ease, EPD, yes, I do not have any problems with you keeping a heifer out of a heifer. My dad in New Mexico, he'd always been like, you can't keep a heifer out of a heifer because you're just going to pull the baby calves out of them. That used to be a very true adage, because if you just kept selecting low birth weight bulls and just bred that constantly in your herd, you do generate heifers that are smaller pelvic area, narrower made, and you will increase calving difficulty in your operation. Luckily, this maternal calving ease EPD, that helps offset some of those issues. And I should have got a hold of Dr. Bob Weber, because he has a beautiful illustration to show you this. But there's 2 calving ease EPDs. There's what they call a calving ease direct, CED, which that is the bull's direct effect on calving ease. whereas maternal calving ease is that bull's effect on his daughter's calving ease. And so if you select a bull to breed to your cow herd that has a high maternal calving ease, and especially if he's, say, a heifer bull who has a high calving ease direct, but also a high maternal calving ease EPD, does not worry me at all to keep heifers out of heifers in that situation. Now, it's difficult to find bulls that are both high calving ease direct and high maternal calving ease because naturally those two EPDs are inversely related. And so that's something that you have to make a decision on when you're looking at purchasing your bulls. Now, you did hear me mention that birth weight, if you just kept selecting low birth weight after low birth weight after low birth weight genetics into your herd, that you will have a calving issue. Birth weight EPD and maternal calving ease are even more highly inversely related than calving ease direct and maternal calving ease. So the lower the birth weight you get, the greater chance you're going to have trouble calving those heifers, or having those daughters out of those low birth weight bulls will have more calving difficulty. If I lost you on that when we come to questions, please go ahead and ask me. Now, we talked about birth date and a little bit of some genetics. Don't forget to go out and actually look at your heifers when you're making your selection criteria. Make sure that they've got good feet and legs. Make sure that their attitude is something that you want to keep in your genetics in your herd. Another thing to look into is, because I get asked this a lot, and so that's probably why you're hearing me mention this more often. But if you are looking to downsize your cow herd, reduce the mature weight of your cow herd, which a lot of folks are looking to do that, go out and look at your heifers and get weights on them. And you can progressively start making a smaller mature cow size by putting a little bit of selection criteria on weaning weight. You only go from the pool of heifers born in the first 21 days, but instead of keeping that biggest, fleshiest heifer, you maybe send her to somebody else's program, because she is going to be your biggest cow who probably has the most milk and in turn offers the most energy requirements and protein requirements. So if you're looking to downsize your cow herd, just select those that are maybe in the middle weight group of those that were born in the first 21 days. And that is one way to kind of help you with that genetic decision. Now, what about in regards to some pre-breeding and vaccination? So we talked about what is some of your selection criteria. What about vaccinations? Well, first off, why do we vaccinate? And hopefully you already know this. An investment in disease prevention is less than the cost of disease treatment. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it helps your animals reach their performance potential. But other things to think about is if you go ahead and vaccinate, it can help minimize your mental and physical stress of having to treat an outbreak. We've been thinking about that a lot more, agricultural stress in our industry. And so anything we can do to help minimize that is worth it. And of course, we're always under the microscope when we're talking about animal production systems, and vaccination is a positive welfare action. So when do we need to vaccinate? I like to do, and there's quite a bit of research shows that the calfhood vaccinations or calf vaccinations are very beneficial, vaccinating at 2 to 3 months of age. And they really like that 2 to 3 months of age for especially your respiratory pathogens, as there's no interaction with passive immunity at the time. So the dam's colostrum or the dam's milk no longer has a antibody response. And when when that or that antibodies or immunoglobulins are starting to go down, it helps be able to protect that calf. And it can provide protection until weaning. And often in most of our spring calving operations, it's easy to administer because you're about ready to kick your cattle out onto grass. And you are doing your pre-breeding vaccinations for your cow herd. So everything's running through the chute at the same time. For replacement heifers, also like to still go ahead and use a brucellosis or a bangs vaccination. Needs to occur between 4 and 12 months. And actually, you could probably even say between 4 and 11 months, because there has been some research out there that shows that if you vaccinate very far after 11 months, sometimes those heifers will come up as a false positive if they were ever tested for brucellosis, and then we have a whole big issue. Veterinarians have to administer it. Now, the brucellosis vaccine, there's been some discussion about whether we still need to do it or not, because, you know, we are pretty much brucellosis free. And we've been able to manage for it and eradicate it, and it's been a very good thing. And if you have a completely closed herd, there's a lot of operations that just don't do it. If you ever want to market your heifers or market the bred cows, they have to have a bangs vaccination, the ID in their ears, especially to go across state lines. It's not a very expensive vaccine, works very well. Your veterinarian does have to administer it. And when I'm talking about some of these other pre-breeding exams, you can have everything set up at once and have your vet out once to be able to do everything else. Another important heifer vaccine is vibriosis. It used to be called Campylobacter. But vibriosis is often considered the most important cause of infertility, repeat breeding activity, and can result in anywhere between abortion rates between 5 to 30%. And a lot of times the abortions occur at 5 to 6 months of pregnancy. And it's a venereal disease that's spread by infected bulls. And so we really want to make sure. I actually go ahead and giving the Vibrios at weaning, booster, and pre-breeding. And pre-breeding needs to occur 30 to 60 days prior to breeding as a general guideline for what vaccines to do. And then for leptospirosis, I have a 5-way. I like to use, and a lot of veterinarians I visit with, like to have more than one strain of leptospirosis in your vaccine. And it's just kind of the same. It's also a reproductive disease that leads to abortion in stillborns, occurs about 6 to 12 weeks after initial infection, and occurs mostly in the 3rd trimester. And leptospirosis is a very common issue in areas where we have warm, stagnant water. And the leptospirosis organism thrives during the summer in those environments. Here in eastern Kansas, what is our primary source of water for our cows, especially over the summer? Ponds. Ponds are a huge reservoir of leptospirosis. Now, you can see that there's one extra lepto vaccine at Preg check as compared to the Vibrio. That's because the leptospirosis vaccine only lasts about 6 months. It's only efficacious about 6 months in the animal due to the type of pathogen and vaccine that it is. So cheap vaccine, worth a lot to be able to keep it in your back pocket to reduce preg rate or to reduce potential losses due to pregnancy. Here's just a summary of the vaccinations, and I put that in when I go to give the PDF to Rod and all your other agents so that you can have that as a little card. Now, I do also strongly recommend testing all replacement heifers for BVD-Pl. And actually, if you're going to test for it, as soon as they are born is the best time to do it, because there has been research projects that show that couple-day-old calf, a week-old calf that's BVD-Pl positive can shed enough that it will impact that next year's breed up rates. So go ahead and do the test and do the ear notch sample. That's still the best test that they have. It's easy to collect and ship, and it's not affected by maternal antibodies, not interfering by any kind of antibody. If you do the blood test, if they had a natural BVD infection, the titer levels would be high enough that you get a false positive off of a BVD-Pl test potentially. You don't get that near as much with the ear notch sample. If you want me to go into more detail about BVD-Pl, you can ask that in a little bit. But so just a simple little ear notch tool. It's a pig tagger. Just take a little clip out of the ear. Work with your testing facility for whatever packaging they want. I mean, there's even some testing facilities like this one that has the ear tag with a barcode, and when you put the ear tag in, it punches a hole out of the back of the ear into the collection vial. You stick the lid on, and it's got the same barcode as on the ear tag, and I mean, everything was already automatically done for you. You just had to put an ear tag in. And I'm sorry, this slide should have been moved up further, but I'm glad it was brought up. The maximum lifetime productivity occurs when heifers calve at 2 years of age. So I've put this in to remind me to talk about the old adage of the older the heifer is, the first time she has a calf, the less calving difficulties you'll have, is not necessarily true in today's production environment, especially with our genetics that we have today. Calving at 2 years of age is so much more economical for you than calving at 3 years of age. And in regards to the number of animals you're going to have to help pull, it is not going to make that big of a difference. So sorry, we went off on tangent. Now we're coming back to more of this pre-breeding information. So when you were doing your pre-breeding shots, that 30 to 60 days prior to breeding, also have your, well, you know, if you're trying to get them bred at about a year of age to calve at 2 years of age, have your vet out, give them brucellosis vaccine, and do a reproductive tract score. So what is a reproductive tract score? Well, it's when your veterinarian will actually go in and identify whether that animal is cycling, a free marten, or immature. They're just actually physically palpating and feeling that reproductive tract for size, tone, size of the ovaries. The vets can do really good at measuring follicles and corpus luteum. And reproductive tract scores is something that can be a little bit heritable, but the more important portion of the tract score is its correlation between preg rates. Now, I like to use the tract scores, especially if you're doing it when they're about a year of age. Anything that has a score of a 2 or below, I cull those heifers. They are just too immature for what your production system is. And you can see here, you know, here at a 2, preg rates, even over a full 90-day breeding window for some of these studies, between 60 to 80%, only that many will get pregnant at a Tract score of a 2 or a 1. A 5 means they are already cycling. A 1 means they are not. The other way I like to use Tract scores is if you're looking to utilize artificial insemination in your herd. You get the most return on the investment of that semen if you were to put it in those heifers that were in a Tract score of 5 and a 4. You look at conception to AI preg rates, and you're above the 50% mark if you're in that 4 and 5 range. And so when I have my Tract scores, I identify those that are in a 4 and a 5 to be going into my AI program. And anything that's a 3, I just kick in with the bull right away. And I get rid of all 2s and 1s. So those are some things that you can utilize Tract scoring as a pre-breeding tool to be able to improve your conception rate. Now, another tool when you're doing your pre-breeding exam is to get a pelvic area measurement. And you can use it as a culling tool. There's some folks that don't necessarily like to use it as a culling tool. I do, and it's not just purely from the measurement side. I like when you have your vet in there, instead of just coming up with the size, also have them identify shape and or anything that is abnormal in the pelvic. Because as they are in there feeling around, doing their pre-breeding exam, doing Tract score, and something just doesn't feel right, or, you know, they can't get their hands squeezed in, just imagine trying to have a baby calf through that. Now, your veterinarian can use a couple of different tools. Said the most common one that the vets that I've seen in the area use this kind of caliper looking tool, and they'll go in and give you a width and a height. So how do you use those pelvic measurements? Typically, why do we want to use pelvic measurements? Well, pelvic measurements can potentially end up correlating to the calf size in pounds that animal should be able to have without assistance. So let's just kind of look at, this top table. I should have just deleted off of this presentation, but these are the division factors to go and calculate your calf size potential. So you take the pelvic area, so your vet will give you a width and a height, take those two, multiply them together to get area, and then divide by this division factor that came up in this table some statisticians worked with. But then it could potentially tell you calf size. So say you were doing the exam at 12 months of age, and you had a 600-pound heifer that only had a 140 square centimeter pelvic area based off of her division factor. So we got 600, 12 month, there's where that came from. That heifer could be able to have a 67-pound calf without any trouble. Whereas a same age and weight heifer that has 180 square centimeter pelvic area, she can have nearly a 20-pound heavier calf. So that is how you can potentially utilize pelvic measurements to be able in your operation. Well, that doesn't really help you when you're stand and shoot side. With our Sunflower Supreme Heifer program, we had came up with a threshold. We said at 12 months of age, we want our heifers to have a minimum of 150 square centimeter pelvic area. If they aren't quite there and you still go ahead and breed them at preg time, they need to have a 180 because that's what they should be going to by that time. And so at that, we feel that with our calving yeast EPD genetics that are out on the market, that's a pretty reasonable pelvic measurement number to use. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop for a minute. Does anybody have some questions on the selection and pre-breeding before I spend the remainder, like the next about 15 or so minutes on nutrition? Okay, so we are going to move on to the nutrition portion. So in regards to our replacement heifer nutrition programs, and I'm talking about from weaning till breeding, and I'll talk maybe just a little bit about post-breeding, but mainly I'm focusing on that window between weaning and breeding. So there's really two things that are important in regards to the nutrition. You need to set your development weights and determine what your development or operational goals will be. And you want to manage your heifers or the processes of managing your heifers to achieve those target weights. So traditionally, we have always said develop heifers to achieve 55 to 65% of their mature weight at breeding. And, you know, for a long time, everybody had said 65% was the magic number, but there's been some lower target weights that have been identified as, especially if you have a large number of heifers that are being exposed as compared to what you actually need to replace within your herd. And our other target weight is we want to make sure that at calving, those heifers are 85 to 90% of mature weight at calving. And so a lot of folks forget about that. They almost make those heifers rough it too much after they get them bred. They really baby them till they get them bred and then just turn them out. Well, those heifers still need to keep gaining, and they're going to keep gaining weight until they're 3, and some of them, depending on maturity of the breed that you're using, all the way out to 4 years of age before they are fully mature. The mature weight numbers, they've came from, you just kind of use what your average mature cow weight is. I'm going to go ahead and hop on my soapbox a bit. Average mature cow weight for your herd is not the weight of what the cows are when they go to the sale barn, unless you're getting rid of cows on a regular basis. Typically, when the cows that go to the sale barn are your thin problem cows or your fat open cows who've been open for a while. So both ends of the spectrum are not quite what the average weight of your cow herd is. You don't have to weigh every cow in your cow herd. If you don't have a set of scales on your operation, one of the things I like to do is when you have your cows loaded up to maybe haul to go to the vet or haul them to go to pasture, run them across the scale and get a spot weight just every once in a while so you can guess what the average mature weight of your herd is. So I'd mentioned that traditionally everybody always developed them to 65% of mature weight was your heifer's target at breeding. But there's been quite a bit of newer research out that has looked at breeding them at smaller body weights or doing a very low input heifer development system. And this data came out of Nebraska, where they either developed them at 50% of the herd's mature weight or 57%. Their target was supposed to be 60, but they didn't quite hit it. When you look at the percentage of heifers that were cycling at the beginning of breeding season, preg rate, those that calved within a 45-day window and calf weaning weights. There was no difference in whether those heifers were developed to 50% of mature body weight or roughly that 60. However, they did see that those that were developed a little bit heavier had calves that weaned a little bit heavier. And the other part of this study that was very interesting to me, yes, our overall preg rates were not different. However, when you read in the footnotes, those heifers that were developed to 50% of mature body weight, they gave them a 60-day calving or a 60-day breeding window as compared to only a 45-day breeding window with those on these developed at 60% of body weight. So I didn't think that was quite a fair comparison between the two. And in another study, once again out of Nebraska, where they had them essentially on a low gain, where they only were about 52% of mature body weight at time of breeding versus a high gain where they were closer to that 60. You know, and this is still pretty low gains, to be honest, for both of them. Oh, here we go, 53 and 58. So I was close in remembering. Those heifers that were on the high gain, a greater percentage of them were cycling prior to breeding, but there was no difference in this set of cows all the way out through their second, third, or fourth calf in regards to preg rate, whether they were bred at a 53% of mature body weight as a heifer or at a 58% mature weight as body heifer. 58% of mature body weight as a heifer. So I was like, why in that one study did it seem like, yeah, there was no difference, but they had to give them longer breeding time. And the other time they worked on same breeding window with the, and went to a lighter mature weight and had no problems. Well, it all boiled down to the type of cow in those systems. And so if you are looking into whether you want to develop your heifers to that 65% of mature weight or the 55% of mature weight, once again, it comes down to operational specifics. If you have purebred or mostly straight bred heifers, developing them to that heavier mature weight, you're going to get more animals bred. Later maturing breeds, larger framed animals. And if you have a limited number of cows, because even though those two studies I showed that they still had success breeding, and there was no difference statistically, numerically, there was about a 4% difference in preg rate. Would you be happy with that in practice with getting 4% less animals bred? So if you only have 20 heifers and you need to keep 20 to replace your old cows, going with that 60% of mature weight is the way to go instead of the 55. If replacement heifers are worth a lot of money or cost a lot to purchase, the more you get bred, the more money you can stand to put into the system to get them to a little bit heavier of a weight. Now, if you are looking at developing them or do a lower input system, crossbred and earlier maturing and moderately frame are the keys to successfully developing heifers at a lighter weight. You need to have a much greater number of heifers exposed to bulls than you plan on keeping. And maybe you can get how many you need. So those are just a couple of things to think about in regards to which set of developmental goals you want to go with. we also, I kind of like going with that 60%, just because in life, most biologic things should be a bell-shaped curve. So if you aim for the average weight of your heifers to be at that 60% of mature body weight, you're going to have some over here in that 65 range, and you're going to have some over here in the 55 range. So the law of averages should work and help you in that situation. This is just to remind you, go ahead and get a weight on your cows. This information is feedlot exit weight for off of, oh, and I am completely blanking on it. It's a monthly feedlot report that K-State does send out. But you can see this goes back to January of 1990 to January of 2019. And look at the increase in exit weights out of the feedlot. All of that genetic increase in weight did not come just from the bull side of the equation. It's in the cow side as well. So really do go ahead and get a weight on your cows. I still hear a lot of people say, oh man, I just have a 1,200 pound cow. And we run a bunch of them through and they weigh 1,600. Our cows might not be taller than they used to be, but they're sure a lot wider. If you can ask people who've got some older chutes, squeeze chutes, you'll find that out very quickly. So mature cow weight and some of the most recent U.S. Meat Animal Research Center data shows that roughly the average mature cow size for the country is 1,400 pounds. So how do we calculate for our target weights? So if you have a 1,400 pound mature cow, if we want them in that 55 to 65% immature weight, at breeding, that heifer needs to weigh between the upper 7s to low 9 weights and needs to weigh roughly 1,200 pounds at calving. So if you have a 600 pound heifer at weaning, takes you about 200 days to get them up to, say, 840 pounds, which is that 60% of mature body weight. Take that 240 divided by 200. So those heifers only need to gain 1.2 pounds a day, average daily gain. That's a pretty easy ration to develop with most of our feedstuffs to be able to have your cows or your heifers ready at that weight. How do we go about putting that weight on those heifers? And there's been several research projects that have looked at that. Let's just go ahead and jump right into how the different projects that they looked at. So this is the percentage pregnant based on the pattern of gain. So they either had an even gain, so like in our example that we just calculated, they gained that 1.2 pounds average daily gain from weaning until breeding. That's even gain. The slow fast example is something that maybe those heifers only gained 0.75 pound average daily gain for the first half of the season. And I'm going to use the word season as between weaning and breeding. And then the second half of the season, they were on a higher plane of nutrition. So maybe you put the heifers out on corn stalks over the winter and then moved them on to your pasture that was starting to green up for summer and feeding them range cubes. That could be an example of a slow fast. Fast slow, as completely opposite. So the first half of the season they gained quite a bit, and then they tapered off their average daily gain after that. So an example of that would be background in your heifers, or putting them in a pen for 90 days and then kicking them out on some other dormant winter range or something like that. And then there was even one study where they did a fast, slow, fast, which is probably what a lot of producers end up doing. You wean your heifers, do about a 60-day in a pen, maybe weaning, where they're getting fed a little bit better of a ration. Have them rough it over the winter on dormant native range, and then maybe get to go into the nice brome pastures in the spring. Now, regardless of which pattern of gain, there was no statistical difference between any of these methods. But within all of these studies, all the heifers attained their specific percent of mature body weight goals and a body condition score of around 6 at time of breeding. So the take home, as long as you hit those targets, meet your percentage of mature weight and a body condition score of 6, you're going to be successful at getting those heifers bred. Now, you need to make sure you go ahead and try and check some weights. Feeding and forgetting is a little bit risky, especially, we could talk about this because it's fresh in everybody's mind right now. The environment plays a huge role in our gains. As you would anticipate, unless you were really feeding them, which hopefully you were when they were going through their extreme cold stress this past couple of weeks. When it's cold, wet winter, you have much higher maintenance requirements and you have less growth. So when is the best time, or when you really need to make sure you check your heifers for weight? 60 to 90 days prior to your breeding season is very important, so you can make some nutritional changes to make sure those heifers hit that mature weight and body condition goal. I do want to briefly touch on this because we also do get a lot of questions about this. Excessive crude protein leads to reduction in preg rates is what people have always asked me about or have brought up. And I'll say that there was some truth behind that. There were studies that found that excessive dietary protein reduced pregnancy rate, but those studies were all in dairy cows. In regards to beef cattle, very little correlation between excessive crude protein and pregnancy rates. The biology that happened in the dairy cows and that we're still worried could happen in our beef cow herd as well is that the soluble protein, the protein that gets dissolved in the rumen, or rumen degradable protein, can increase serum urea nitrogen, which reduces uterine pH. A more acid uterine environment is not conducive for pregnancy. And so that's why it happened in the dairy cows. In our beef cattle, most of our protein sources, especially that we're looking at supplementing, outside of urea, don't have a lot of really, really, really highly rumen degradable protein sources. Other than like wheat pasture. Wheat pasture does have a lot of highly degraded, rapidly degraded protein. But when you work on balancing what is degraded in the rumen and bypass proteins, what's degraded in the intestines, balancing that, you can overfeed protein, and we don't see very many negative issues in our beef cattle herds. And there's actually quite a bit of data out of Oklahoma that's almost debunked they were bred a bunch of heifers on wheat pasture and had no issues at all. But if you are concerned, because it is something that could happen, and I'm sure everybody's probably heard of somebody who had heifers out on wheat pasture that had trouble breeding. If excessive crude protein is a concern, that serum urea nitrogen responds very quickly to diet changes. So to be extra cautious, 2 cycles, 45 days before you plan on breeding them, put them on a lower crude protein diet, as long as you meet your protein requirements. Should help you maybe be able to sleep better at night, that you're not causing some of those reductions in preg rates. And another question I get a lot of is dry lot versus forage-based development. Can you develop your heifers? Is one better than the other? And the literature's kind of all over the board on that. And my take home from all of those is you can be successful in both systems if you make sure your heifers are gaining weight after breeding. That's where the biggest problem occurs, is in developing your heifers in a dry lot. When you transition them to grass, that's when we have our biggest issues. Because most of the time we just take them out of the feedlot, go kick them out on grass and say, hey girls, go on and do it. That's a big no-no. And this is actually what's in the yellow and green down here at the bottom, shows you average daily gain of heifers that were developed on the range in green and maintained out on the range, or were developed in a feed lot or a dry lot and then kicked out on grass middle of May. And you can see that first week when they measured gain, those heifers that went from the dry lot onto grass had a huge negative gain during that first week. After that, they kind of, had similar gains as those on grass. Now, interestingly enough, that negative plane of nutrition for that week corresponded in this study to a reduction in an increase in early embryonic death loss in that herd. Now, these same researchers did the same project several more years and fed 3 pounds of distillers a day for that first week. Those heifers went from the dry lot onto the grass, had no problems at all after that. So my take home, and there's a lot of projects that show that they're like, man, you can't develop a heifer in a dry lot because when they get out on grass, they just crash. If you provide a little bit of maintenance, maybe you could even use the word babying, but take care of them that first week out on grass. If you have no other place to develop your heifers other than in a dry lot, you can make it successful for your operation. Now make sure you don't get your heifers too fat in the dry lot. That's a whole nother discussion. Body condition score 6 is good. Body condition score 7 or 8, not good. And, I said I was only going to briefly mention one thing about post-breeding, and that is post-breeding, make sure that you keep those heifers gaining weight. This is summary out of a study out of Wyoming and Purdue. And this is just looking at AI preg rates. And when you see that those heifers after breeding that maintained their weight, as in did not gain anything, or lost weight because they were fed a deficient diet, they had significantly lower pregnancy rates as compared to those heifers that after breeding were set on a positive plane of nutrition. So make sure that you keep those animals gaining weight after breeding. Otherwise, even if they did get bred, they're going to lose that calf. So I'm sorry, I thought I had hit all of those, but I had touched on body condition score, and this is, if you aren't familiar with that, this is just areas that we use to evaluate body condition score, and there's several K-State publications about how to use body condition score in your operation. But why is it so important? In that 5.5 to 6, you have a greater percentage of those heifers that are cycling prior to breeding. And a heifer who's not cycling does not have a chance to breed. So you really want to give those heifers as much option to get bred as they have the chance to. So I've been talking for plenty enough time, so I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation and take the questions you might have.
So if anybody has questions, please unmute and just go ahead and ask Jamie Lynn the question, and we will go from there. So feel free to unmute and ask questions. Well, Jamie Lynn, I'm not seeing any questions come up, and I'm not seeing anything come into the chat. We appreciate your presentation this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. For those of you that are out there, this was the third of our series of virtual meetings. March the 3rd, we have a crop fertility meeting. March the 10th, we'll have a beef quality assurance practices with Dr. Tarpoff. And then on March 17th, we will hit on anaplasmosis in beef cattle and fly control strategies. And once again, AJ Tarpoff will be our speaker, along with Cassandra Olds. She's our new entomologist at K-State, and so we'll have her down. And that'll wrap up our virtual meeting series. So with that, if anybody, one last time, anybody got questions, let's unmute and ask questions. And if not, we will call the meeting to an end.
And I am putting in the chat box my contact information in case you had any questions you wanted to visit with me about, not on this platform.
All right. Well, Jamie Lynn, thank you very much. We appreciate all you've done for us this evening. If people have questions, I'm sure they will be getting a hold of you. So thanks again. And everybody, thank you. We're going to bring the meeting to an end. Maybe we'll see you next week or in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much. See ya.